The document was 6 pages long, a field intelligence report, standard format, black text on white paper, the kind of document that gets filed in triplicate and read by 3 people and forgotten inside a week. But this one did not get forgotten. This one got photocopied and passed around and eventually ended up framed on the wall of a training room at a base whose name most people will never know. The final paragraph read as follows. Meridian Valley Incident. Duration of engagement, 14 hours, 31 minutes. Enemy force strength, 300 personnel. 12 armored vehicles, air support on standby. Opposing force 1. Confirmed enemy, kill 0. Friendly casualties, sustained 1 non-critical, self-treated, in the field. Objective delay, Eastern advance by minimum 6 hours. Actual delay, L delay achieved 14 hours, 31 minutes. Someone had underlined that last number in red ink. 14 hours, 1 person, 300 soldiers, and she vanished. Before the first shot was fired, before the burst smoke rose over the industrial district of Meridian Valley, before Lieutenant Colonel Richard Harmon gave his first order of the morning, there was a woman moving through darkness. It was 0545. The Arizona desert does not warm slowly. It holds the cold of night until the sun clears the ridgeline, and then it releases it all at once like a decision being made. At 0545, the air was still cold, the kind of cold that makes metal feel alive under your fingers, the kind of cold that sharpens the mind, whether you want it sharpened or not. She moved through a gap in the factory wall that most people would not have recognized as a gap at all. A section of concrete that had shifted 2 inches to the left during a blast 6 weeks earlier, leaving a space 43 centimeters wide between the outer wall and an interior support column. She had measured it. She had measured everything. Her name was Staff Sergeant Maya Cole. She was 32 years old. She carried 400 rounds of a modified civilian shortwave radio, 3 days of water, 2 days of food, a medical kit, a breaching charge the size of a paperback novel, and a rifle she had cleaned 4 times in the last 18 hours. She carried no orders. There was no extraction plan. No one at any command post in any operations center in any radio room within 40 miles of Meridian Valley knew that she was here. Her unit had been reassigned 48 hours ago. New sector, different grid, standard redeployment. On every piece of paper that existed, Staff Sergeant Maya Cole was somewhere else entirely. She had filed a false confirmation report. She had done it quietly, methodically, without drama. A single transmission, 3 lines timestamp logged. The kind of thing that gets checked against a roster and filed without a second look. And then she had turned around, pulled her gear, and walked back toward the one place she was absolutely not supposed to be. She did not do it impulsively. She had been planning it for 6 days. 6 days earlier, Meridian Valley had been nearly quiet. The fighting had moved east toward the processing plant, and the old factory district had settled into that particular silence that follows violence, heavy, uneasy, like a room where an argument has just ended. Aerial photographs showed the factory complex from above 3 stories partial, roof collapse on the northern wing loading docks, on the eastern face 2 parallel drainage systems running beneath the entire structure and extending 300 meters east before connecting to the municipal water channel. Maya had studied those photographs until she could close her eyes and walk the building. Then she had done something the photographs could not give her. She had walked it herself. For 3 nights, working alone, working in complete darkness, she had moved through the factory like water finding its level. She tested every floor section. She noted which staircases held weight quietly and which ones announced themselves. She crawled through the ventilation shafts on her stomach, measuring width with her shoulders, testing load-bearing capacity with her fists. She found the drainage tunnel entrance beneath a collapsed section of the main floor, obscured by 2 feet of fallen concrete and a tangle of rebar. She cleared the entrance by hand, moved the concrete piece by piece over 4 hours, and then replaced it exactly as she had found it. She identified 12 firing positions. Each one offered a different angle. Each one had a guaranteed exit route. No position would be used more than once. The building was not a stronghold. It was a maze she had already solved. On the 4th day, she placed a heat pack near the northeast window of the 3rd floor. Standard chemical heat pack, military issue, the kind used to keep field rations warm or prevent hypothermia in cold weather. She wrapped it in fabric and positioned it against the window frame at seated human height. She tested it with her own thermal scanner from the loading dock below. At medium range in the right conditions, it read as human. She set a timer for the pack's activation. It would reach full temperature at 700. Then she went back into the tunnels and waited for morning. At 5:58, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Harmon stood beside his armored vehicle at the eastern edge of the staging area and watched the sun come over the ridgeline. He was 51 years old. Lean in the way that men get lean when they have spent decades doing physical work in dry climates. Not muscular, exactly, but compact. Nothing wasted. His face had the particular expression of someone who has seen enough to stop being surprised by most things, but has not yet stopped being interested. 20 years of operational command, 4 combat rotations, more briefings than he could count, and more firefights than he liked to remember. He had been told this morning would be straightforward. The objective was the water processing plant 400 meters northwest of the factory district. Strategic control point, last significant infrastructure before the northern corridor. Intelligence assessed minimal resistance. The bulk of opposition forces had withdrawn the previous evening. What remained was expected to be light, disorganized, and unable to sustain contact. 300 personnel, 12 armored vehicles, air support on 30-minute standby pending weather clearance. 90 minutes, the briefing had said. Conservative estimate. Harmon had done the math himself. He agreed with 90 minutes. The ground favored movement. His people were rested. The objective was clear. He keyed his radio. Bravo elements advance on schedule. Keep your intervals. Watch the rubble fields on the north side. Drainage runs under there, and the ground is soft. All units acknowledge. 12 units acknowledged, one by one. Harmon climbed back into his vehicle and watched the tactical display as 300 soldiers began to move. The factory district at dawn looked the way abandoned industrial spaces always look, enormous and exhausted, like something that had been built for purposes no one quite remembers anymore. Concrete shells, rebar twisted by old blasts into shapes that suggested nothing so much as desperate reaching. Grain silos with their upper sections sheared off. Loading docks that had accepted their last delivery years before any of this started. Between the buildings, smoke from a fuel depot, 200 meters south, rose in a column so straight it looked deliberate. The air tasted of dust and something chemical underneath it, the particular scent of materials that had been burning slowly for a long time. Sergeant First Class Derek Teller was moving along the eastern perimeter of the factory complex when he stopped transmitting mid-sentence. He had been relaying grid coordinates to the communications element. Standard procedure, nothing urgent. His voice was clear and measured, and then it was simply absent. The radio operator beside him processed the silence for approximately 1 full second before his body understood what had happened, and by then he was already moving, dropping behind a section of blast barrier, pressing himself flat against the concrete. Teller was on the ground. The shot had entered through the left temple. There was no muzzle flash. There was no report that carried over the ambient noise of the advancing column. There was only Teller and then Teller on the ground, and the radio operator pressing himself against concrete and scanning the rubble field ahead and seeing nothing. Harmon received the report 14 seconds later. He crouched behind his vehicle and studied the angle. The entry trajectory told him elevation, height advantage, something northwest. The half-collapsed factory complex 400 meters out offered the most likely position, 3rd floor or above. Good sight line across the entire eastern approach. Sniper, he said into his headset. Single shooter probably embedded in the factory ruins. All units take cover. Ground teams advance with smoke. Get me thermal on that factory complex immediately. The words had barely finished when Corporal Devin Richter went down. Richter was 30 meters to the right of Teller's position. He had been behind a section of standing wall partially covered. The shot found him anyway. Throat shot. The kind of precision that takes the conversation out of a human being between one breath and the next. 38 seconds had passed since Teller fell. 2 kills, 2 different angles. Harmon looked at the geometry of it and felt something shift in the back of his mind, a small, cold recalculation. 2 different angles in 38 seconds meant either 2 shooters working in coordination or 1 shooter moving with a speed that did not fit comfortably inside normal parameters. He filed the thought away. He had a problem to solve. All units take cover. Ground teams hold position. Air recon, I need thermal imaging on the factory complex northwest quadrant, all floors. The battlefield reorganized itself around his order. 300 soldiers finding cover, the forward momentum of the advance suddenly becoming stillness. The straightforward morning had become something else. Harmon had been in enough engagement as to recognize the difference between a problem and a reckoning, and he was not yet sure which one this was. A third shot came at 0645. This one punched through the radio unit mounted on the communications vehicle before it found the operator's shoulder. The equipment exploded in a shower of sparks and acrid smoke. The operator went down hard but stayed conscious, one arm, not responding, face turned sideways in the gravel, still breathing. Harmon noted the angle. Northwest. 3rd position in 8 minutes. All different, all precise. The thermal scan results came back at 700, sir. His intelligence officer's voice was careful, measured in the way voices get when the information they are carrying is significant. We have a heat signature. Northeast corner, third floor. Single target, seated human profile. Stationary. Harmon pulled up the display. There it was, a small, bright shape against the cooler architecture, exactly where the trajectory analysis had pointed. One source. One shooter. Alone. He allowed himself a thin moment of something like relief. One. Not two. Not a coordinated element. One person. Confirmed single target, affirmative, sir. No other signatures in immediate vicinity. One sniper. Holding up 300 soldiers. Audacious. Bold in a way that lived right on the edge of reckless. Harmon understood the tactical logic: delay, not destroy, buy time for something else somewhere else, but understanding the logic did not make it less impressive. Deploy Patrol Team 7, he said. Eastern flank approach. Teams 8 and 9 bracket from the south. I want that building surrounded before she can relocate. Move. The orders went out. 3 units, 8 soldiers each began their approach in coordinated intervals, using rubble and smoke columns as concealment. 24 soldiers moving toward one. The thermal signature had not moved. Harmon watched the display and thought, too confident or too inexperienced to know when to run. He would find out which one shortly. Corporal Nora Gallagher led Team 7. She was 28 years old, and she was good at her job in the specific way that people get good at things when they take them seriously from the beginning, rather than learning to take them seriously after making expensive mistakes. She moved her unit forward through the skeletal remains of a loading dock rifle, sweeping left and right in steady arcs, eyes reading the structure above her. The factory loomed. 3 stories of crumbling infrastructure held together by rusted support beams and accumulated silence. Thermal shows 3rd floor northeast corner, she said into her mic. No movement in 2 minutes. Copy. Copy that, Harmon replied. Proceed with caution. Assume hostile is aware of your position. She signaled her team forward. They entered through the gap in the eastern wall, stepping over fallen concrete and shattered glass that crunched under their boots with a sound that seemed much too loud. The interior was what the exterior had promised, darkness interrupted by shafts of early light, cutting through holes in the roof, dust suspended in those shafts like something waiting to be disturbed, the air carrying the smell of old metal and damp concrete, and something else underneath that she could not name, but her body recognized as wrong. They found the stairwell. Half the steps were missing. The ones that remained had the look of things that had been tested many times and were tired of being tested. Gallagher put her boot on the first riser. It held. She put her weight on it slowly. It held, moving up. The climb took 4 minutes. Every step a negotiation. The structure groaned in ways that concrete should not groan. Metal shifting against metal somewhere inside the walls, the sound of a building that had been damaged in ways not entirely visible. Her team moved in single file rifles, raised eyes tracking the shadows above. 2nd floor, more rubble, more shadows. The remains of machinery that had once served some industrial purpose now lay scattered like the aftermath of something violent, which it was. The stairwell to the 3rd floor was gone. Not damaged, not partially collapsed. Gone. In its place was a jagged hole in the ceiling, the floor above visible through it, 8 feet up with nothing connecting the 2 levels. We need ropes, Gallagher said. She was reaching for her pack when Harmon's voice came through Team 7 report. We're on the 2nd floor. Stairwell to 3 is destroyed. Requesting permission to climb. Permission granted. Target is stationary. Proceed. She pulled a climbing rope from her pack, and then something happened that none of them had been expecting. Which is to say, something happened that the whole morning had been quietly building toward, though none of them had the information yet to understand it. The thermal signature on Harmon's display did not move. It had not moved in 7 minutes. It would not move because it could not move because it was not a person. At 07:20, Harmon was watching the display when Captain Evelyn Marsh appeared at his elbow. She was looking at the feed with an expression he had learned to pay attention to over the 18 months they had worked together, the expression of a person who has noticed something and is deciding whether to say it. Sir. What? That signature. She kept her voice even. It hasn't shifted in 7 minutes. Not a millimeter. No postural adjustment. No respiratory movement. She paused. People don't sit that still. Harmon looked at the display. She was right. The shape was perfectly, absolutely motionless. He had seen thermal signatures of sleeping soldiers who moved more than this. Could be injured. Injured people still breathe. This isn't breathing movement. He looked at it another 3 seconds. And then from the radio, Gallagher's voice, contact. Third floor. It's a pause that was too long. Sir, it's a jacket. It's a jacket propped against the window frame. There's a heat pack inside it. The realization arrived in Harmon's mind with the particular clarity of information that changes the shape of everything around it. Not a shooter, a signal, a message left in the only language she knew he was reading. I was here. I knew you were watching. And I have been somewhere else for longer than you know. Marsh had already picked up her radio. Harmon watched her hand tighten on it, watched her look at the jacket still visible in the thermal feed, and then he watched her go still in a different way from the thermal signature, the way people go still when they have recognized something they were not expecting to recognize. She saw the unit patch on the jacket. Harmon saw her see it. Marsh, she did not look at him immediately. One beat. Two, sir, what is it? She looked at him then. Her expression was the expression of someone carrying information they are not ready to give. Yet information they need one more moment to understand themselves before they can hand it to someone else. Nothing, sir. I thought I recognized it's nothing. I'll verify. She stepped away from the display, already reaching for her encrypted radio. Harmon watched her go. He noted the movement, filed it. He had been in enough situations to know that when a person of Evelyn Marsh's caliber said, "It's nothing," in that tone, it was not nothing. But he also had 24 soldiers converging on a building with no shooter in it, and that problem required his immediate attention. He keyed his radio. Team 7, that jacket, is there a unit patch on it? A pause. Affirmative, sir. Patch is still on the sleeve. Looks like it was left deliberately. The pack inside is still warm. She was here recently. The heat pack had been placed 4 hours ago. Maya had been in the tunnels since 0545. All units, Harmon said, and his voice carried the specific flatness of a person recalibrating. The third floor is a decoy. Target is not on the third floor. Assume she has relocated. All teams hold current positions and await. The shot came from below, not from above, not from the ruins northwest, not from the position that every asset he had was currently pointed at. From below, from the ground floor, from the section of the building that teams 8 and 9 had spent the last 4 minutes walking past. Sergeant Eli Dempsey took the round in the shoulder. He went down sideways hard, losing his rifle. The second round caught the communications specialist 3 feet to Dempsey's left, the radio on his back exploding in sparks before the bullet completed its work. Gallagher's voice from the third floor. She's below us, western sector ground level. By the time teams 8 and 9 reached the western ground floor, the position was empty. One spent casing on the concrete. Disturbed dust. A clean line of sight to the position where Dempsey had been standing, and nothing else. No blood, no gear, no sign of passage. She was already somewhere else. Harmon stared at the tactical display. 3 units, 8 soldiers, each converging on a building they now controlled completely. Thermal showing nothing. UAV showing nothing, sir, his intelligence officer said. We have no signature, no movement. She's not reading on thermal anywhere in the building. She's in there. Sir, we've swept. She is in that building. His voice was controlled and absolute. Deploy all 12 patrol teams. Establish a perimeter at 400 meters. I want every exit sealed, every tunnel entrance, every drainage outlet, every hole in every wall. Nothing moves in or out. She has 15 minutes before we go in with gas. 12 teams acknowledged. The grid closed in from every direction. Harmon watched the display and felt for the first time that morning something approaching certainty. They had thermal. They had aerial. They had bodies on the ground covering every possible exit. There was no play left for a single shooter alone in a building that was now surrounded by 300 soldiers. She's out of options, he said. Marsh had returned from her radio call. She stood slightly apart from the rest of the command element, looking at the factory. Her expression was the expression of a person watching something unfold that they cannot stop. She did not agree with him. She had learned enough in the last 3 minutes to know something that Harmon did not know yet, something that would change the shape of everything, something she needed to verify before she said it out loud. She kept it to herself for now. And in the drainage tunnel 40 feet below, where they were standing in the cold and the dark and the smell of rust and standing water, Staff Sergeant Maya Cole checked her watch. The time was 7:05. Quan Tiep Vien Phia Bac would reach the valley at 9:15. She needed 2 hours and 10 minutes. She had 400 rounds, 12 positions. She had prepared herself and the complete contents of Harmon's radio traffic playing through the small speaker of a modified civilian shortwave in her left hand. She could hear everything. She settled in. She waited. The morning had just begun. 3 days after the battle, Lieutenant Garrett Winslow walked the drainage tunnel with a flashlight and a notepad, and the particular expression of a man who has been told something impossible and has come to see the evidence for himself. The tunnel was 4 feet wide and 5 feet tall in the wider sections, less in others. The floor was covered in 2 inches of standing water cold and rust-colored smelling of old iron and the particular decay of places that have not seen sunlight in years. Winslow moved slowly, pausing every few feet, training his light on the walls and floor, reading what the space had left behind. He found the first indication 30 meters in, a faint compression in the silt along the eastern wall where the water was shallower. Not a full boot print, a partial the ball of a boot, someone who had been moving carefully, distributing weight forward. He crouched and studied it for a long time. Then he stood and wrote one sentence in his notepad. She came in. She did not plan to go out. He had read the after-action reports. He had read the thermal logs, the patrol communications, the timeline reconstructed by 3 different intelligence analysts working independently. He understood in the abstract what had happened in Meridian Valley on the morning in question. But there is a difference between understanding something in the abstract and standing in the place where it happened, and Winslow had learned over the course of his career that the place always tells you things the paper cannot. What the tunnel told him was this: she had not been trying to escape. Every piece of evidence pointed inward, not outward. Her movements throughout the morning had taken her deeper into the structure, deeper underground, always toward the center, and never toward the perimeter. While Harmon's 12 teams were sealing every exit, tightening the grid from 400 meters inward, she had been moving in the same direction they were moving, toward the middle, into the space they were all converging on. They had been closing a net around a woman who was already standing at the center of it. Winslow wrote a second sentence. The objective was never escape. The objective was duration. He kept walking. At 7:05, the factory complex was surrounded. 12 patrol teams, 8 soldiers, each positioned at intervals around a 400-meter perimeter with overlapping sightlines and no gap wider than 20 meters between any 2 positions. UAV coverage from above, thermal from multiple angles, ground-penetrating motion sensors deployed at the 3 tunnel exits that the engineering maps showed. Everything Harmon had available had been committed to a single purpose. 1 woman, 1 building, nowhere left to go. Inside the building, in the maintenance level below the ground floor, in a section of tunnel that did not appear on any engineering map because it had been added informally during a renovation project 9 years earlier by a contractor who had since ceased operations and whose records no longer existed. Staff Sergeant Maya Cole sat with her back against the eastern wall and listened to Richard Harmon's radio traffic and thought about geometry. She had been in this autonomy since 0545. Her body temperature had been dropping steadily since she stopped moving, and she managed it by breathing slowly and keeping her core muscles engaged and thinking about the problem in front of her rather than the cold against her back. The shortwave radio sat on her knee, its speaker turned low enough that she had to lean close to hear it, which meant her ear was 6 inches from the speaker, and she could feel as much as hear the transmission. Harmon's voice controlled and flat. Nothing moves in or out. She has 15 minutes. She looked at her watch. 7:06. She had 2 hours and 9 minutes. She checked her ammunition. 400 rounds as counted before dawn. She had fired 3. She had not been firing to kill, which is why Dempsey and the communications specialist were hurt rather than dead. She had been firing to communicate. Every shot had said the same thing in a language Harmon understood at the tactical level without yet understanding at the strategic one. You do not know where I am. She ran the building in her mind, not the building as it existed, partially collapsed, structurally compromised, 3 floors and a subfloor and 2 drainage systems, but the building as she had mapped it during 3 nights of crawling. 12 positions, each with a different angle and a different exit. She had used 2 so far. 10 remained. But positions were secondary to the larger problem, which was this. Harmon had thermal aerial coverage and bodies on every exit. The thermal and aerial were the real constraints. Ground patrols could be moved around, redirected, confused. Thermal imaging could not be confused unless you gave it something else to read. She reached into her pack and removed the second heat pack. This one she had prepared differently. She had wrapped it in 2 layers of fabric and placed a small chemical activator against the outer layer connected to a timer set for 19 minutes. When the pack activated, it would read at approximately 93.4 degrees Fahrenheit, which was slightly cooler than a human body at rest, but close enough at medium resolution to register as a person conserving energy in a cold environment. At the distance of the UAV's thermal sensor in the current atmospheric conditions, it would hold that reading for approximately 40 minutes before the chemical reaction degraded. She set the timer. Then she moved. The ventilation shaft that connected the maintenance level to the ground floor was 18 inches wide and 37 feet long, angled at 11 degrees upward. She had measured it. She had crawled it 3 times in darkness during her preparation, once with her gear, to confirm she could manage it without noise. The key was in the shoulders, rotating slightly to the left on the upward sections, keeping the rifle against her body rather than dragging it, exhaling fully before the 2 narrowest points to reduce chest circumference by enough to pass without the fabric of her jacket scraping the metal. She emerged beneath the loading dock at 07:09. The loading dock had been cleared by Team 8 40 minutes earlier. They had found nothing, confirmed nothing, and moved on to their current position at the northern perimeter. The dock was empty, dim, littered with broken glass and the husks of old pallets. 3 wooden shipping crates sat against the far wall, their lids long since gone, their interiors empty. She went to the second crate and crouched inside it. Through a gap in the crate's eastern face, she had a clean sightline to the approach she had watched Team 8 use when they entered the building. She could see 40 meters of the eastern approach, the point where the rubble field opened into the broader ground, and the position where 3 soldiers from Team 9 were currently stationed with their backs to the factory, watching the perimeter, their attention directed outward. She let them be. Patience was not a quality she had been born with. It was something she had learned through repetition, through situations that had required her to remain still, past the point where stillness felt sustainable until stillness became its own kind of motion, purposeful, and directed inward rather than out. She had learned to read the difference between patience as waiting and patience as working, and what she was doing inside that crate was work. She was listening. Harmon's voice through the shortwave. Confirm all teams on perimeter. I want reports every 90 seconds. Nothing moves. Team leaders acknowledged in sequence. 12 voices measured and professional. She filed each one, building the map of the perimeter in her mind, identifying the gaps in the reporting sequence. The slight delay between teams 4 and 5 that suggested a positioning adjustment was still underway. The confident immediacy of Team 7's Gallagher that placed her unit on the northeastern face, which was the face she needed clear in approximately 14 minutes. The thermal scan result came through at 07:18. Sir, we have a signature. Maintenance level northeast quadrant. Stationary. Strong reading. She heard Harmon's tone shift, not obviously, not in a way most people would have noticed, but she had been listening to his transmissions for 20 minutes, and she had learned his voice the way you learn any instrument, by paying attention to the variations. There was relief in it, small and controlled, but present. Confirmed. All teams hold perimeter. Do not adjust. I want that signature watched. She had given him something to watch. She turned her attention to the problem of Team 9. At 07:22, the shot came from the loading dock. Team 8 had been moving along the western face of the factory's ground floor, conducting a secondary sweep of a space they had already cleared. Protocol: when a target was confirmed elsewhere, you checked your own area again. Sergeant Eli Dempsey had been leading the sweep, moving carefully along the northern wall with his rifle raised when the shot came from a position he had walked past 7 minutes earlier. It caught him in the shoulder and rotated him into the wall. The second shot destroyed the radio unit on the communications specialist 2 steps behind him before completing its trajectory. Both men went down. Neither died. That was not an accident. Gallagher's voice from somewhere above. She's below us. Ground level western sector. By the time teams 8 and 9 converged on the loading dock, the dock was empty. One spent casing on the concrete. Faint compression marks in the dust. No blood, no gear. A gap in the eastern wall that was too narrow to pass through standing upright. Below it, disturbed gravel. She had gone back into the tunnel. Harmon's voice controlled and absolute. She's moving through the tunnel system. Get teams into those tunnels. 9, 10, 11, I want them in the drainage system now. This was the moment Winslow had identified in his reconstruction as the second critical decision point of the morning, the first being Harmon's dismissal of Marsh's observation about the motionless thermal signature. The decision to send ground teams into the tunnel system was the tactically correct response to the available information. It was also exactly what Maya had been building toward. The drainage system under the factory complex was not a simple linear passage. It branched at 3 points, creating 7 distinct paths of varying width and length connecting to the municipal water channel to the east, the collapsed basement of a former residential structure to the north, and a sealed maintenance junction that did not appear on the engineering maps. The branches were not equal. Some were passable, some were not. Some looked passable and then were not. She had mapped all of them. They had not. Teams 9, 10, and 11 descended into the drainage system at 07:42. Lieutenant Ames, commanding Team 10, split his unit at the first branch point, sending 3 soldiers south and 3 soldiers north, taking the central passage himself with 2 others. The split was the correct decision given his information. His information was incomplete. He did not know that the southern branch narrowed to 16 inches at its midpoint, making it impassable to a soldier carrying full gear. He did not know that the northern branch ended in a sealed junction after 60 meters, which looked from a distance like it continued but did not. He did not know that the central passage turned sharply right at its far end and opened into a junction chamber that connected to the unmapped maintenance tunnel through a gap in the wall at floor level 8 inches high and 2 feet wide, invisible in the dark. Unless you were looking for it, invisible even then, unless you knew exactly where to look. She had been in that junction chamber at 7:15. She was elsewhere by the time they arrived, but she left something behind. She left a radio. It was a small device, military surplus, powered by 2 AA batteries set to Harmon's operational frequency. She had secured it to the junction chamber wall with a strip of adhesive tape, its speaker facing upward, its volume set to low. Mounted, she placed the 6 flex cuffs she had prepared that morning, and she waited. The 6 soldiers from Team 10, who found their way into the junction chamber over the next 30 minutes, 3 from the southern branch, who had doubled back after the passage became impassable, and 3 from the northern branch, who had reached the sealed junction and reversed, found themselves in a space that was dark, damp, cold, and suddenly absent of the noise that had been following them. She was behind them. She was not behind them in the way they feared. She did not come from the shadows with a rifle. She came with the particular kind of controlled efficiency that is the product of absolute preparation, meeting absolute certainty, working in the near-complete darkness with the confidence of a person who has trained for this specific problem in this specific space at this specific time of day. And when it was done, 6 soldiers were alive, uncomfortable, secured to the chamber wall and listening to Harmon's radio traffic. The transmissions played steadily through the small speaker. All units report. Team 9 status. 9 here. Southern branch is a dead end. Doubling back. Team 10 report. Static. Team 10. Ames, do you copy? Static. Team 11, can you reach 10's position? Negative, sir. We're in the northern system. 20 minutes minimum to backtrack. The 6 soldiers heard all of it. They heard the silence where Team 10's acknowledgement should have been. They heard Harmon's voice change in the way voices change when the information arriving no longer fits the model a person has been working from. They listened to the morning come apart, one transmission at a time. At 07:35, Harmon stepped outside his armored vehicle. He had been inside for 4 minutes reviewing the UAV feed, looking for movement in the tunnel outlet zones, trying to reconstruct where she had gone after the loading dock. He came outside to confer with Marsh, who had returned from her encrypted radio call with an expression he still could not fully read. They stood in the open for exactly 12 seconds. He did not hear the shot. He heard the result. The communications array on the vehicle's roof disappeared in a shower of sparks and acrid smoke, the antenna housing fragmenting outward, the equipment below it rendered immediately non-functional. The sound arrived a fraction of a second after the impact, a single sharp report from a direction that made no tactical sense. From the east. From behind him. From the building his forces had cleared and held for the past 40 minutes. He was moving before the sparks finished falling, going flat against the vehicle's eastern face, already processing. East. She was east. She had come back through the tunnel system and reestablished a position in the structure they had secured, which meant the structure they had secured was not secured, which meant his eastern flank had a problem he had not yet fully defined. He regained his radio. All units, shooter is east of the command post. Confirm position and cleared structure, Sector 3. Teams 2 and 4 redirect immediately. It took 11 seconds to issue those orders. It took 4 minutes for Teams 2 and 4 to reach Sector 3. When they arrived, they found a single spent casing on a second-floor window edge, a slight disturbance in the dust below it, and a hole in the floor large enough for a person to drop through into the maintenance level below. She was gone. Marsh was beside him when the report came through. He watched her absorb it without visible reaction. She was doing something he recognized, the sustained management of information that had not yet been fully processed, holding it in a kind of internal suspension, while the immediate operational problem demanded attention. She's still in there, he said. He was not asking. He was thinking out loud. Yes, Marsh said. She just fired from a building we had eyes on for 40 minutes. Yes. That means she went back through the tunnel system, repositioned, and waited for me to step outside. Marsh looked at the damaged communications array. She didn't shoot at you, sir. She shot at the antenna. He heard what she was saying. She could have. She had a clear shot. 12 seconds. Clean sightline. She chose the antenna. Harmon did not respond to that immediately. There are pieces of information that require space before they can be properly examined, and this was one of them. He had been in combat zones for 20 years, and he had developed over that time the ability to hold multiple operational problems simultaneously without losing the thread of any of them. But what Marsh had just said was not an operational problem. It was something else. She had chosen the antenna. Not him, not Marsh. The antenna. He put it aside. The immediate problem was 12 teams, a compromised perimeter, a tunnel system his people were now inside and not reporting from, and no confirmed position on a shooter who had just demonstrated the ability to appear where she was least expected. All units knew protocol. No one operates alone. Eyes on all tunnel entrances. I want the perimeter tightened by 100 meters. If she shows herself, sir, his intelligence officer, the voice that carries information he does not want. Team 10 is not responding. We have 6 personnel unaccounted for in the northern tunnel system. The water tower stood at the intersection of 2 former residential streets, 2 blocks north of the factory complex. It was a standard municipal water tower of the kind built throughout the region in the early 1970s. 40 feet tall, capacity, 10,000 gallons, currently approximately 30% full. Its support structure had taken blast damage 6 weeks earlier. The northeastern leg compromised the overall structure, tilted 3 degrees off vertical. She had measured the angle. She had calculated the load distribution. She had identified the northeastern leg's weakest point, a stress fracture at the base of the second weld, and she had determined that a breaching charge placed at precisely that point would initiate a failure cascade that would topple the tower in a specific direction over a specific period of time. She needed 40 seconds. At 900, she was between Team 3 approaching from the south and Team 7 approaching from the north in the intersection beneath the tower, with 28 seconds before Gallagher's unit would have a clear sight line to her position. The buildings on either side had collapsed into impassable rubble. There was nowhere to go laterally. The teams were 60 meters out on either side and closing. She did not run. She moved to the tower's base and placed the breaching charge against the northeastern support leg at the exact point she had identified 11 days earlier. She set the timer for 15 seconds. She ran east. She covered 22 meters before the charge detonated. The leg failed exactly as she had calculated. The tower tilted, groaned with a sound like something fundamental giving way, and fell northward away from her into the street between her position and Team 7. 10,000 gallons of rust-colored water and the structural mass of 40 years of municipal infrastructure came down across the intersection in a collision that sent a concussive wave of displaced air and debris, dust outward in all directions. Both teams scattered. The dust cloud was 40 meters across and 6 meters high, and completely opaque for 90 seconds. She was through the gap and into an alley before the water finished spreading across the broken street. Behind her, Gallagher's voice, explosion. We're intact. Tower came down between us and Team 3. Target escaped in the confusion. Harmon how? A pause that contained in its particular quality the sound of a person trying to find an answer that does not make them sound like they were outplayed. The tower, sir. She dropped it, between us, on purpose. Another pause. She calculated which way it would fall. Yes, sir. Harmon's voice was very quiet when he responded. Did anyone see her? No, sir. Not one person saw her. At 08:30, Harmon's radio crackled with a report from Team 2. Sir, we have a visual on a female subject. Western Ridge, 700 meters. She's standing in the open. He pulled up the UAV feed. There she was, a figure on the ridgeline in clear view standing upright, rifle across her back rather than in her hands. 700 meters from the nearest patrol position. Far enough to be safe from direct fire. Close enough to be seen clearly. She was not hiding. She was watching. It's bait, Marsh said. She said it immediately without hesitation, as though she had been expecting this moment. I know it's bait. He studied the figure. The question is what she's baiting us toward. He looked at the tactical display. The teams surrounding the factory complex. The tunnel teams still underground. The compromised perimeter, the damaged communications the morning that had become something he did not have a precise word for yet. He made a decision. Teams 1 and 6. Western Ridge. Box approach opposite directions. UAV maintains overwatch. If she moves, I want to know before she moves. The units mobilized. The figure on the ridge did not move. When teams 1 and 6 were 300 meters out, moving in from different angles, closing the distance in coordinated intervals, the figure raised one hand. slowly, deliberately. A wave. Then she stepped backward off the ridgeline and was gone. The teams ran. They expected to find her at the base of the cliff, injured from the drop, caught finally in the physical reality of a ledge with no way down. What they found was a length of rope secured to a boulder at the ridge's edge, the free end hanging down the cliff face. The rope had been cut. Not at the boulder at the bottom where it had been severed after she descended, taking the lower section with her. By the time teams 1 and 6 worked their way around to the base of the cliff, she was a quarter-mile away, moving through a ravine that did not appear on the tactical overlay because it was too narrow to register as significant on the aerial mapping software. Harmon watched it happen in real time through the UAV feed. She had stood in plain sight of 300 soldiers, waved at them, and then walked away. Marsh said nothing. At 10:25, Harmon received the report from the tunnel teams. 6 personnel from Team 10 had been found in the unmapped maintenance junction, alive, secured to the wall with standard military flex cuffs, standard military issue, their own equipment turned against them. None injured beyond minor bruising, all in possession of their sidearms, which had not been taken from them, only rendered inaccessible by the position in which they had been secured. None of them had seen her. All of them had heard her, not her voice, not anything she said. They had heard the sounds of what she did in near complete darkness, in a space she knew and they did not, and those sounds had lasted less than 4 minutes for all 6 of them combined. The radio was still playing when the recovery team found them. Harmon's transmissions, 4 hours of them, every order and every response, in every moment of recalibration, the entire arc of the morning playing on a loop through a small civilian device taped to the wall above 6 of his soldiers. The recovery team sergeant who wrote the initial report noted in the understated language of official military documentation that the 6 personnel appeared to have been significantly affected by the sustained radio transmission. What he meant and what he did not write, because it was not the kind of thing that belongs in official reports, was that when he found them, they were not talking about the woman who had put them there. They were talking about the voice on the radio, about how it had changed over the course of 4 hours, about the specific quality of a person's voice when certainty becomes something else, when the morning they had planned and the morning they were experiencing stopped resembling each other, and the gap between those two things became audible. They had listened to Harmon's morning fall apart one transmission at a time, and she had wanted them to. At 11:15, the assault on the water processing plant failed, not because of resistance. The plant was empty, had been empty since the previous evening, the remaining opposition forces having withdrawn north after the reinforcement element arrived at 09:15. It failed because the 300 soldiers who reached its perimeter were not the same 300 soldiers who had begun moving at 0600. They were the same people, the same training, the same equipment, the same chain of command. But something had happened to them over the course of 5 hours that training does not account for and equipment cannot prevent. They moved too slowly, checked too many corners, flinched at sounds that were only wind and rubble. 2 incidents of friendly fire, neither fatal, both the product of men whose threat assessment had become imprecise in the way that threat assessment becomes imprecise when the threat has refused to behave like a threat is supposed to behave. Harmon received the order to withdraw at 11:30. He acknowledged it, issued the necessary commands, and watched his forces begin the pullback. Then he sat inside his vehicle and looked at his tactical display for a long time without speaking. Marsh entered with a tablet. She set it on the table in front of him without commentary. "We found them," she said. "Team 10's missing personnel, alive and secured in the maintenance junction." He looked at the tablet. The initial report. 6 soldiers uninjured, flex cuffs, 4 hours of radio playback. She didn't hurt them. "No, sir." He read further. The radio on the wall, the transmissions, the sustained, deliberate exposure to 4 hours of operational failure heard in real time. He turned to the last page of the report where the recovery team had photographed the contents of the room. The 6 soldiers, the radio, the wall above them. And pinned to the wall a piece of paper positioned so that everyone in the room could read it from their secured position. 3 words. "You were spared." He read it twice. Then Marsh reached forward and turned the paper over in the photograph, the backside visible. Now the words she had not mentioned until this moment, the words that had made her go still, in a way he had noticed and not yet understood. He read them. His face did not change. He set the tablet down on the table and folded his hands and looked at the wall of his command vehicle for a very long time. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and removed the photograph and held it, not looking at it, just holding it, the weight of a piece of paper that had become the weight of something considerably larger. Outside, his forces were pulling back in good order. The valley was going quiet. The smoke from the fuel depot had thinned. She was gone. She had been gone in all the ways that mattered since before the first shot was fired. The file was 47 pages long. Lieutenant Garrett Winslow had been given access to it in a secured room at the Eastern Command Post through 3 separate authorization layers, handed across a table by a reviewing officer, whose expression suggested he was glad to no longer be the one holding it. Winslow had spent 2 days walking the battlefield before he read it, and then he spent 6 hours reading it, and then he sat for a while in the flat institutional light of the secured room and thought about the difference between what he had seen in the valley and what the paper in front of him was telling him those things meant. He had walked the factory floor. He had crawled the ventilation shaft or tried to stopping at 8 inches because a lean man carrying nothing could not pass through 17 inches of clearance. He had found the heat pack still sitting near the third-floor window, chemically exhausted now, but still positioned exactly as she had left it, exactly at seated human height, exactly where the thermal scan would read it as a person at rest. He had measured the water tower debris field, stood at the base anchor, calculated the arc of the fall. He had found the maintenance junction, and the radio still taped to the wall, its batteries dead, its frequency still locked to Harmon's operational channel, the adhesive tape and the empty flex cuff casings still exactly where she had placed them. What the battlefield told him was how she had done it. What Caldwell's file told him was something more important. The operational timeline was in the file's third section, compiled from 3 independent intelligence analyses, working from the same raw data. The northern reinforcement element had reached position at 09:15. He read the timestamp twice and then he sat back and did the arithmetic. 9:15. The mission objective, delay the eastern advance by a minimum of 6 hours, had been achieved at 09:15. She had continued until 11:30, 2 hours and 15 minutes after the objective was satisfied, after the tactical purpose of her presence in that valley had been fulfilled, after the minimum requirement had been exceeded by a margin that would have constituted success by any professional standard. She had kept going. Winslow turned to Caldwell's assessment of that decision. It was 3 paragraphs written with the precise economy of a person who understands that the most important things often require the fewest words. If she had stopped at 09:15, Harmon would have had time to recognize the strategic shift. He was an experienced commander who had been operating under sustained pressure and would have given relief from that pressure, reorganized his force for a secondary engagement. That reorganization against a retreating but armed opposition force would have required contact. The estimate was conservative and unsentimental, between 12 and 20 additional casualties on both sides based on terrain force disposition and Harmon's established tactical patterns across his operational history. She had continued because stopping would have cost lives. Not her lives, their lives. The lives of the people she had been fighting for 14 hours without ever being on the same side as. Winslow put the document down. He thought about the shoulder wound, the shrapnel from the water tower confirmed by the bloodstains in the tunnel, self-treated in the dark without slowing down. He thought about what it meant to make the calculation Caldwell described, 12 to 20 lives probability weighted, measured against the cost of continuing while bleeding, exhausted, alone in a tunnel under a surrounded building 2 hours past the point where the job was technically done. He wrote one sentence in his notepad: every minute after 09:15 was voluntary. She paid for every one of them herself. He turned to the file's final page. Caldwell's closing notation was formatted in the standard administrative language of mission closure. Brief, categorical, impersonal. The kind of language that reduces 14 hours of extraordinary human experience to a series of data fields that can be filed, archived, and retrieved without anyone having to feel the weight of what they contain. Mission delay, Eastern advance, minimum 6 hours. Actual delay, achieved 14 hours, 31 minutes. Confirmed enemy kills 0. Friendly casualties sustained 1, non-critical, self-treated in field. Assessment objective exceeded by 143%. Psychological impact on opposing force significant and sustained. Commendation denied. Reason: no confirmed deployment record in theater for this operative. Operative designation redacted. Current status: active duty. Location classified. He read the commendation line twice. She had walked into that valley alone. No orders, no backup, no extraction plan. She had filed her own false deployment confirmation before she turned around and walked back, which meant she had known from the beginning that if she survived, the official record would not contain her. There would be no recognition, no medal, no acknowledgement in any document accessible to anyone without the kind of clearance that most generals could not obtain. She had made that calculation in advance, weighed it against the value of the mission, and decided the mission was worth the trade. He closed the file, He thought for a long time about what it meant to do a thing completely, to do it well, to do it at cost, and then to walk away from it into a record that did not admit you had been there. He thought about the carved stone on the western ridge, which he had visited the previous afternoon, finding the letters exactly as described in the patrol reports. Two words cut carefully into a flat rock, with something sharp. Each letter clean and deliberate, the work of a person who had taken time because the time was worth taking. She vanished. Not her name, not a message to anyone in particular, not a declaration of what she had done. A record written in the third person from the perspective of someone already standing outside the event and looking back at it with the steadiness of a person who has finished a thing and put it down. He had stood in front of those letters for 10 minutes. He had thought about the deliberateness of it, the choice to carve something into stone in the middle of an active operational area, surrounded by the evidence of a battle she had just fought alone before walking away to whatever came next. She had not written her name because her name was not the point. She had not written a message to Harmon because Harmon was not the point. She had written two words that described what the story would look like from the outside from the perspective of 300 soldiers who would spend years trying to explain what had happened to them. Two words that were accurate and sufficient and required nothing added to them. He added the photograph to his report without annotation. Some things are their own explanation. There was one thread remaining. Captain Evelyn Marsh had made an encrypted call on the morning of the battle shortly after seeing the unit patch on the jacket left in the third-floor window. Winslow had the call log duration 4 minutes 12 seconds destination, a classified relay station that bounced to a facility he did not have access to. He had the partial transcript from the recording that survived the communications array, damage 11 seconds of audio in which Marsh's voice said, "The patch on that jacket, I know the unit. No, I'm not telling Harmon, because if he knows, he'll escalate. And if he escalates, people die." He requested the full call content through 4 channels over the course of a week. All 4 requests were denied at the same authorization level. He wrote in his report Captain Marsh's prior knowledge of the operative's identity and the nature of her decision to withhold that knowledge from Lieutenant Colonel. Harmon remains unresolved pending access authorization. Assessment: the decision to withhold likely prevented a tactical escalation that would have increased casualties on both sides. Whether that decision was within Captain Marsh's authority is a matter for the appropriate review board. He submitted the report and did not hear back about Marsh. He did not expect to. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Harmon retired 8 months after the battle. The retirement event was held at a facility he had worked from for 6 of his 20 years, attended by people who knew parts of the story, and others who knew all of it, and a few who knew none of it. He moved through the evening with the ease of a man who has been in enough rooms to know how to be present in a room, shaking hands, accepting words from people who had served with him and meant what they said. When pressed about Meridian Valley, as he was pressed several times, the way that people press about the things they most want to understand, he said the same thing each time. "We had every advantage. We still lost. That's worth thinking about. Not a story, not an explanation, a fact offered as a fact with exactly the weight it carried and no additional weight attached." He had been carrying something in the left chest pocket of his jacket since the day Marsh had turned over the paper in the photograph. She had not told him what was on the back before he read it. She had simply reached forward and turned the photograph over, and he had read what was there, and he had folded the original and put it in his pocket, and it had been in his pocket or in his hand or on his desk every day for 8 months. What was written on the back was a number, 14, and below it, count them. He had counted them. He and Marsh had spent an afternoon with the operational record working chronologically, identifying every confirmed moment at which she had a clear shot and had not taken it. They found 14, not approximately, exactly 14, verified by trajectory analysis and position documentation, and the testimony of soldiers who had been in her silent line and had not been shot. This was not mercy in the sentimental sense. He had been in enough engagements to know the difference between a person who could not take a shot and a person who chose not to. She had been telling him something precise. She had been telling him that she had controlled the engagement from the beginning, that every outcome had been within her capacity to determine, and that the outcome she had chosen, the one in which nobody died, had been a choice she made deliberately in advance, as part of the preparation she had done 6 days before the first shot was fired. She had shown him the arithmetic of what she had not done. He kept the paper in his jacket because it was the most honest communication he had received in 20 years of professional service. It contained no false comfort, no qualified language, no hedged assessment. It said exactly what it meant. In his study above his desk, he hung the photograph Winslow had taken of the carved letters on the western ridge. Below the photograph in his own handwriting, "If she vanished, you survived by luck." He looked at those words every morning. They were not comfortable words. They were not meant to be. 2 years after Meridian Valley Master Sergeant Frank Dolan stood at the front of a training room and pulled up a satellite image of an Arizona valley on the screen behind him. He was 48 years old. He had been part of Team 5 on the morning in question, one of the units that had swept the factory building 3 times and found nothing. He had been looking in the right places for the wrong thing. He understood that now in a way he had not understood it at the time, and that understanding was the reason he was standing at the front of this room rather than out in the field. There were 12 students, all selected, all capable, all about to discover that capability was not the same thing as clarity. 2 years ago, Dolan said one person held 300 soldiers in this valley for 14 and a half hours. No backup, no orders, no extraction plan. She killed no one. He paused the way he always paused at this point, letting the numbers settle. No one, not one person, one, and then she vanished. He looked at the room. "I'm going to tell you what she actually did, not the tactics. You'll analyze those on your own time with Winslow's reconstruction. What she actually did." He wrote 3 words on the board: objective, preparation, restraint. She was clear about her objective: not to win the battle, not to defeat Harmon, to delay the Eastern advance long enough for reinforcement. That's it. Every decision she made served that objective. Nothing she did was extra. He pointed to the second word. She prepared so completely that improvisation became unnecessary. The water tower solution, the tunnel repositioning, the thermal decoy, none of those were improvised. Everyone had been developed before the battle began. She outworked them 6 days before she outfought them. He pointed to the third. 14 clear shots. 14 confirmed opportunities to kill. She took none of them. He turned from the board, not because she couldn't, because it wasn't necessary. The objective did not require it, and she was disciplined enough to not do the things she was capable of doing simply because she was capable of doing it. Corporal Claire Brennan sat in the second row. She had read the incident summary as part of her program preparation. She had thought she understood it. "Sergeant," she said, "after 09:15, the mission was technically complete." She kept going for another 2 hours. "That's not in any summary I read." "No," Dolan said, "it's not." He put down his marker. If she had stopped at 09:15, Harmon would have reorganized. Reorganization means contact. Contact in that terrain with those force dispositions cost lives. She calculated that and she kept going. He looked at the room. She was wounded at that point. Shrapnel in the shoulder, self-treated. She had been in that valley alone for 9 hours. The job was technically done. A pause. She kept going anyway. The room was quiet. "She prevented deaths that no casualty report will ever record," Dolan said, "for people who will never know her name." And when it was over, she walked to a ridge and carved 2 words into a rock and left. He looked at Brennan. No commendation, no record of deployment. The paperwork says she was never there. "Do you know her name, Sergeant Number?" Brennan waited as though there might be more. There was not. "That," Dolan said, "is the point." He turned off the projector. "Physical assessment tomorrow, 05:30. Read Caldwell's full assessment tonight. All of it. Not the summary. When you find the 3 paragraphs about what happened after 09:15, read them twice." He picked up his folder. "Remember this. The mission is larger than the recognition. The objective is larger than the outcome. The most important thing you will ever do may be the thing that no official record ever acknowledges." He moved toward the door. She understood that before she went in. That's why she came out. He left. The room took a moment to settle after him. Brennan looked at what she had written in her notepad, 1 line underlined once. She was clearer about what winning meant. She thought about it for a long time. Then she closed the notepad and prepared for the next day. In a building whose address did not exist in any searchable record, in a room 3 floors below a facility whose designation appeared on no public map, a woman sat at a metal table with a field kit open in front of her and a rifle broken down into its components on a clean cloth. She was 34 years old. Her left shoulder carried a scar, 3 inches long, clean and well-healed, the kind that forms when a wound is properly managed in difficult conditions by someone who knows what they are doing. No medical record attached to it, no treatment log, just the scar and the knowledge of how it had been acquired, which was hers alone. She reassembled the rifle without looking at it. Her hands moved through the sequence, the way hands move through sequences that have become continuous with the body, not thought, not mechanical. Something in between, the product of repetition, become reflex. Each part seated correctly, each mechanism checked, the whole made ready. On the table beside the field kit was a manila envelope. She had not opened it yet. She finished the reassembly, set the rifle aside, looked at the envelope for a moment with the particular quality of attention she gave to things that were about to require something from her, not hesitation, not reluctance. Assessment. She picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, standard format, mission parameters, grid coordinates, operational timeline, equipment, authorization. The designation at the top was redacted. The authorizing officer's name was blank, as always. She read the mission parameters. She read them twice. She thought about them for approximately 40 seconds. Then she folded the paper and put it in her jacket pocket in the left chest pocket, where it would be close to her body and accessible without removing the jacket. She picked up the rifle. She stood. She did not think about Meridian Valley. The valley was 2 years behind her, and she was not a person who carried the past forward in ways that did not serve the present. What the valley had required, she had given it. What it had wanted, she had paid. What it had meant was something for other people to determine for Winslow with his notepad and Dolan with his whiteboard and Harmon with his framed photograph. That was their work. It was good work, and they were welcome to it. Her work was the next thing. She walked out of the room and down the corridor toward the facility's exit. The building was quiet at this hour, the kind of institutional quiet that is the absence of people rather than the presence of stillness. Her footsteps were even unhurried, the footsteps of a person who is going somewhere with a clear understanding of where that somewhere is. She pushed open the exterior door. The Arizona desert received her without ceremony. The evening air carried the particular dryness of high desert at the end of a warm day, the temperature dropping steadily, now the sky moving through its gradations toward dark. The ridgelines to the west were silhouettes. The first stars were coming in over the eastern horizon. She paused for 3 seconds on the threshold, not looking back, not looking at anything in particular, simply present in the interval between one thing and the next. Then she moved. The dark took her quickly, the way the dark takes people who know how to move through it, and in 30 seconds she was gone, not hidden, not concealed, simply no longer where she had been, which was the only kind of vanishing that had ever mattered. Somewhere in an Arizona valley, on a flat rock, on a western ridge, 2 words waited in the stone for whoever came next. She vanished. They would wait as long as the stone lasted. It would be enough.